You are not my real mother." The scream cut through the ballroom like a knife. Every conversation stopped. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. More than 200 guests turned toward the stage where 5-year-old Hana Kang stood trembling with anger. The little girl pointed directly at the elegant woman beside her. Her tiny finger shook. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You are not my real mother." A collective gasp swept through the room. The woman, Sujin, forced a smile as dozens of cameras continued flashing. "Hannah, sweetheart," she said softly. "Everyone is watching. Come here." The child immediately stepped back. "No." The guests exchanged nervous glances. At the center of it all stood Kang Min-jae, one of the most feared mafia bosses in South Korea. No one dared breathe too loudly around him. Yet at that moment, even he looked completely stunned. "Hannah," he said carefully. "What are you talking about?" The little girl turned toward him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Daddy, she is lying." The ballroom became even quieter. Sujin's smile began to crack. "Hannah is tired," she laughed nervously. "She's had too much cake." "No." Hannah's voice rose again. "You're not my mommy. My mommy has different eyes." The photographers immediately lowered their cameras. Guests looked at one another. Something felt very wrong. Min-jae slowly crouched in front of his daughter. "Who told you that?" The little girl sniffled. "Nobody." "Then why are you saying it?" "Because it's true." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Hannah suddenly turned and ran. "Mommy!" she cried as she disappeared into the crowd. "Mommy is waiting for me." The words hit the room like a bomb. Min-jae immediately stood. "Hannah!" But she was already gone. The guests erupted into whispers. Sujin's face had gone pale. Nobody noticed her trembling hands. If that opening shocked you, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments what you think Hannah knows. Because what happened next would expose secrets buried for years. Min-jae quickly moved through the mansion, searching for his daughter. Bodyguards followed behind him. "Hannah." No answer. "Hannah." Still nothing. Finally, one of the maids pointed upstairs. Young Miss went to the East Wing. Min-jae hurried in that direction. The East Wing was rarely used. Most rooms there had remained locked for years. When he reached the corridor, he noticed a door slightly open. Inside, Hannah sat on the floor. She was holding something tightly against her chest. Min-jae entered slowly. "There you are." The little girl looked up. Her eyes were red. "Daddy, what happened down there?" She didn't answer. Instead, she held out a piece of paper. It was a drawing, a woman's drawing. The drawing was simple and childish, but the details were surprisingly clear. Long hair, gentle eyes, a beautiful smile. Min-jae frowned. "Who is this?" "My mommy." His expression changed. "Hannah, that's my mommy." "No." He shook his head gently. "Your mother is Sujin." The little girl immediately looked upset. "No." "Hannah, no." She stood up. "That's not my mommy." Min-jae stared at the drawing. A strange feeling suddenly formed in his chest. The woman looked familiar. Very familiar. Yet he couldn't explain why. Before he could ask another question, Sujin appeared at the doorway. "There you are." Her smile returned instantly. She walked toward Hannah. The little girl immediately hid behind her father. The reaction did not go unnoticed. Sujin stopped. For a brief second, anger flashed across her face. Then it disappeared. "Hannah is upset," she said. Min-jae continued staring at the drawing. "Have you seen this before?" Sujin glanced at it. "No." Her answer came too quickly. Min-jae looked up. "You seem certain?" "It's a child's drawing." Something about her voice sounded strained. The Mafia boss narrowed his eyes. He had spent years reading people. Fear, deception, loyalty, betrayal. Those instincts had kept him alive. And right now, he sensed something unusual. Sujin was nervous. Very nervous. That night, after the birthday celebration ended, the mansion finally became quiet. Most guests had gone home. Min-jae sat alone in his private office. The drawing remained on his desk. He stared at it again. The more he looked, the stranger he felt. A knock sounded. "Come in." His longtime bodyguard entered. "Boss." "What is it?" "The security report from tonight." Min-jae accepted the folder. Then he paused. Did Hana spend time in the East Wing before the party? The bodyguard looked surprised. Yes. How often? A few times recently. Min Jae's eyes narrowed. Doing what? We're not sure. That answer bothered him. Find out. Immediately, boss. The bodyguard left. Meanwhile, across the mansion, Su-jin sat alone inside her room. Gone was the charming smile she showed the world. She looked terrified. She looked terrified. A servant entered quietly. Madam, did anyone see? No. Are you sure? Yes. Su-jin exhaled. The servant hesitated. What if the child remembers more? Su-jin's expression hardened. She won't. But tonight. I said she won't. The servant immediately lowered his head. Su-jin walked toward the window. The city lights glittered outside. For years, she had worked carefully, patiently. Every step had been planned, every risk calculated. And now a 5-year-old child was threatening everything. She clenched her fists. No, she whispered. I didn't come this far to lose. The following morning, Hana woke up before everyone else. She quietly left her bedroom. Still wearing her pajamas, she walked down a hallway most people ignored. At the end stood an old storage room. She glanced around. Nobody was watching. Slowly she opened the door. Dust covered everything inside. Old furniture, boxes, forgotten memories. The little girl moved directly toward a wooden chest hidden beneath a white sheet. She lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs. Her eyes brightened. There you are. She picked up one picture, then another, then another. Suddenly her face froze. A photograph had slipped from the stack. It showed a younger Min Jae standing beside a beautiful woman. The same woman from her drawing. The same woman she kept seeing in her dreams. And between them stood baby Hana. The little girl's heart began racing. She stared at the photo. Then she whispered the words that would change everything. I knew it, unaware that above the room, an old security camera had quietly captured every second. And elsewhere in the mansion, someone was already watching the footage. The security monitor flickered in the darkness. Su-jin stared at the screen. Her face drained of color. On the footage, Hana stood inside the storage room holding the photograph. Not just any photograph. That photograph. The one that should have been destroyed years ago. The one proof she had somehow missed. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe. Then she grabbed her phone. Get to the storage room now. Her voice shook with anger. Bring me everything that's inside. The servant on the other end immediately answered. Yes, madam. And listen carefully. Yes. If Hana leaves that room with any photographs, take them from her. The line went silent. Madam, what if she refuses? Su-jin's eyes hardened. Then make her. She ended the call. For the first time in years, genuine fear settled into her chest. Meanwhile, Hana carefully tucked the photograph inside her pajama pocket. She smiled at the image. The woman in the picture felt familiar. Safe. Warm. The same woman she had been dreaming about for months. She touched the woman's face in the photograph. Mommy, a sudden noise startled her. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. The little girl quickly closed the chest. The storage room door opened. A servant entered. Hana. The smile immediately vanished from her face. What do you want? The servant forced a laugh. Everyone is looking for you. I was just leaving. His eyes dropped to her pocket. The corner of the photograph was visible. What do you have there? Nothing. Hana, show me. No. The servant stepped forward. The little girl stepped back. I said show me. It's mine. His expression changed. Hana. The child turned and ran. The servant cursed. Stop. But Hana was already racing down the corridor. Her small feet slapped against the polished floor. The photograph remained clutched tightly in her hand. Behind her, the servant chased desperately. Come back here, she screamed. Daddy! The sound echoed through the mansion. Several guards immediately turned. Min Jae emerged from his office. His eyes widened. Hana! The little girl ran straight into him. Daddy! He caught her before she fell. What happened? She pointed behind her. The servant froze. Panic flashed across his face. Min Jae immediately noticed. His voice became cold. Why were you chasing my daughter? The servant swallowed hard. I wasn't chasing her, boss. You were running after her. I only wanted to help. Min-jae looked down. Hana was shaking. He tried to take it. What? The little girl revealed the photograph. The moment Min-jae saw it, everything around him seemed to stop. The image looked familiar. Too familiar. He stared at the woman standing beside him in the picture. Beautiful, elegant, smiling. And suddenly fragments of forgotten memories flashed through his mind. A laugh, a voice, a wedding ring, a promise. The images disappeared as quickly as they came. Min-jae grabbed the wall. Daddy. Hana looked frightened. I'm fine. But he wasn't. Something inside him felt shaken. He turned toward the servant. Who is this woman? The servant's face went white. I don't know. You're lying. No, boss. Min-jae stepped closer. Every guard nearby became silent. Everyone knew that look. It was the look Min-jae wore before destroying his enemies. Answer me. The servant began sweating. Before he could speak, another voice interrupted. Min-jae. Everyone turned. Soo-jin approached calmly. At least she appeared calm. Inside, she was panicking. She smiled when she saw the photograph. Oh, she laughed softly. That's why everyone is upset. Min-jae held up the picture. Who is she? Without hesitation, Soo-jin answered. A distant relative. The answer came too fast. Too smoothly. Min-jae noticed. So why is she standing beside me? Soo-jin paused. Only for a second. But Min-jae saw it. She worked for the family years ago. The explanation sounded weak. Even the guards exchanged glances. Min-jae looked back at the photograph. The woman didn't look like an employee. She looked like family. Very close family. Hana suddenly grabbed his hand. That's my mommy. Soo-jin's smile nearly disappeared. No, sweetheart. She is. No, she is. The argument grew louder. Finally, Min-jae raised his hand. Silence. He looked directly at Soo-jin. Find every record connected to this woman. The order hit her like a punch. What? You heard me. Min-jae, this is ridiculous. I decide what's ridiculous. The coldness in his voice shocked her. For years, she had controlled every situation. Now, things were slipping. Fast. That evening, Min-jae sat alone in his office again. The photograph rested on the desk. Beside it were several reports. Employee records. Family archives. Financial documents. Something immediately stood out. The woman in the picture appeared nowhere. No employee file. No personnel records. Nothing. It was as if someone had erased her existence. The office door opened. His chief bodyguard entered. Boss, what did you find? The bodyguard hesitated. That alone was unusual. Speak. We found an elderly nanny. Min-jae looked up. A nanny. She worked for the family before disappearing 6 years ago. Bring her. She's already here. Minutes later, an elderly woman entered. Her hands trembled. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Min-jae. Young master. The old title immediately caught his attention. Nobody had called him that in years. The nanny suddenly noticed the photograph. Tears filled her eyes. Oh God. Min-jae leaned forward. You know her. The nanny nodded slowly. Yes. Who is she? The woman looked terrified. For years she had kept silent. For years she had hidden. Now the truth stood directly in front of her. Tell me. The nanny's voice cracked. Her name is Ji-yun. The room became silent. Min-jae repeated the name softly. Ji-yun. A strange pain shot through his head. Another memory flashed. A woman laughing beneath cherry blossoms. The same woman. Ji-yun. The image vanished again. The nanny began crying. You really don't remember. Min-jae froze. What don't I remember? The old woman wiped her tears. Then she said the words that changed everything. Ji-yun wasn't an employee. The office felt colder. The bodyguards exchanged glances. The nanny continued. She wasn't a relative. Min-jae slowly stood. His heart pounded. Then who was she? The old woman looked directly into his eyes. She was your wife. The room exploded into silence. Even the guards looked stunned. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Min-jae simply stared. What? The nanny sobbed openly now. She was your wife. His head spun. No. Yes. No. The memories started coming faster. A wedding ceremony. Holding someone's hand. A newborn baby. Promises. Laughter, love, then darkness. Pain, blood, gunshots, an explosion. Min Jae grabbed his desk. The room blurred. The nanny continued, speaking through tears. After the assassination attempt 6 years ago, everything changed. The Mafia boss slowly looked up. His voice barely emerged. What happened to her? The old woman hesitated. Fear returned to her face. She glanced toward the door, toward the windows, toward every shadow in the room, as if she expected someone to be listening. Finally, she whispered, "They told everyone she died." Min Jae's eyes narrowed. They? The nanny nodded. Then another tear rolled down her cheek. But she didn't die. The room went completely silent. And somewhere else inside the mansion, hidden behind a partially open door, Soo-jin stood frozen after hearing every single word. Soo-jin's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear herself think. From the shadows outside the office, she had heard every word. Ji-yun, alive. The old nanny had finally spoken. The secret she had buried for 6 years was rising to the surface. And if Min Jae discovered everything, she would lose more than her position. She would lose her freedom, perhaps even her life. Inside the office, Min Jae stared at the elderly nanny. His voice was barely above a whisper. If Ji-yun didn't die, where is she? The old woman lowered her head. I don't know exactly. Tell me what you know. They took her away. Who took her away? The nanny hesitated. Fear filled her eyes. I never saw their faces. Min Jae slammed his hand against the desk. Enough. Everyone jumped. Years of confusion and buried memories were colliding inside him. His head hurt. His chest felt tight. Stop protecting whoever did this. I'm not protecting anyone. Then tell me everything. The nanny began crying again. The night after your assassination attempt, Ji-yun disappeared. What happened to me? You were unconscious for weeks. Min Jae frowned. He remembered fragments. Gunfire. An explosion. Blood. Then darkness. The nanny continued. When you finally woke up, your memory wasn't the same. The room became silent. You forgot many things. Min Jae slowly sat down. He knew she was telling the truth, because even now his memories felt incomplete, broken, like pieces of shattered mirror. Then Soo-jin arrived. The nanny's words made him look up sharply. What do you mean? She appeared shortly after. Min Jae's jaw tightened. And at first everyone thought she was helping. The old woman paused. But little by little, people who asked questions disappeared. A chill spread through the room. The chief bodyguard exchanged glances with the others. This was becoming much bigger than anyone expected. Meanwhile, outside the office, Soo-jin quietly stepped away. Her hands trembled. She knew exactly what had to happen. The nanny could not be allowed to talk anymore. Neither could anyone else. An hour later, Min Jae ordered every trusted guard to begin searching old properties connected to the family. Financial records, land purchases, private estates, anything unusual. For the first time in years, the entire Kang organization was mobilized. As reports began arriving, a pattern emerged. Several large payments had been sent to a remote property outside Seoul. The transactions were hidden under fake company names, but they all led to the same location. Min Jae stared at the documents. What is this place? The chief bodyguard frowned. Officially, it's an abandoned medical retreat. Officially, no one has entered it in years. Min Jae stood immediately. We're going. At that same moment, Hana sat quietly in her room. She held the photograph against her chest. A soft knock came at the door. Daddy. Min Jae entered. The little girl smiled. Daddy. For a moment, his expression softened. He sat beside her. Hana. Yes. Why were you so certain that woman wasn't your mother? The child looked down. Then she answered honestly. Because my real mommy talks to me. The room became quiet. What? In my dreams. Min Jae stared. The innocence in her voice made it impossible to dismiss. She tells me not to forget her. A strange pain stabbed his heart. The little girl continued. She says she's waiting. Min Jae swallowed hard. Waiting where? Hana shook her head. I don't know. Then she looked at the photograph. But she's alive. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Because deep inside, he was beginning to believe it too. The convoy left before sunrise. Black SUVs raced along deserted roads. Min Jae sat silently in the lead vehicle. Beside him was his chief bodyguard. Behind them followed more than 20 armed men. Nobody spoke. Everyone understood the importance of this mission. If Ji-yeon was alive, 6 years of lies were about to collapse. Hours later, they arrived at the remote estate. The property sat behind tall gates and thick forest. It looked abandoned, but appearances meant nothing. Min Jae stepped out of the vehicle. Move! The gates were forced open. Guards spread across the grounds. Minutes passed. Then one of them shouted, "Boss!" Everyone ran toward the rear building. A hidden security room had been discovered. Monitors, records, surveillance footage. Someone had been living here. Recently, the chief bodyguard examined the files. His face darkened. "You need to see this." Min Jae approached. The video began playing. The footage showed a woman walking through a garden. Thin, pale, but unmistakable. The photograph fell from Min Jae's hand. His breath caught. Ji-yeon. She was alive. The room fell silent. Nobody dared speak. The footage continued. The woman looked toward the camera for a brief second, and tears immediately filled Min Jae's eyes. Because he remembered. Not everything, but enough. The wedding, the promises, the day Hana was born, the woman he loved, his wife. Where is she now? The chief bodyguard searched more files. Then he found another recording. The timestamp was only 2 days old. Ji-yeon had been moved, transferred somewhere else. The room erupted into activity. Everyone began searching, one file after another. Then suddenly they found it. A transportation record, a destination, another property, 50 kilometers away. Min Jae's voice turned ice cold. "Let's go." At the mansion, Soo-jin received the news. Her final line of defense had failed. The estate had been discovered. The recordings had been found. Everything was unraveling. Panic overtook her. She rushed toward a hidden safe. Inside were passports, cash, documents, a prepared escape plan. For years, she had believed she would never need it. Now she knew otherwise. But before she could leave, the bedroom door opened. Hana stood there. The little girl had seen everything. The passports, the money, the fear. Soo-jin froze. Hana looked at her. "You're running away." For several seconds, neither moved. Then the child said the one thing Soo-jin dreaded most. "My mommy is coming home." The words felt like a death sentence. Meanwhile, the convoy arrived at the second location. This property was smaller, older, more isolated. Armed guards immediately surrounded it. Min Jae approached the front door himself. His heart pounded harder with every step. After 6 years of lies, after 6 years of loss, the truth was finally within reach. The door opened. A frightened caretaker stood inside. He immediately surrendered. "I don't want trouble." "Where is she?" The man pointed upstairs. "Room 12. Min Jae ran. For the first time in years, the feared Mafia boss was running not toward war, but toward hope. He reached the door. His hand trembled. Then he pushed it open. The room was simple. A bed, a chair, a window. And standing beside that window was a woman. She slowly turned. Time seemed to stop. Tears filled her eyes. His breath caught. The memories crashed back completely. Every single one. The woman smiled through her tears. Min Jae. He could barely speak. Ji-yeon. The distance between them vanished. And 6 years of separation finally came to an end. If you've made it this far, comment below. Truth always wins. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Because the final consequences for Soo-jin and the emotional reunion with Hana are only beginning.